Hello and welcome to IMHO. Today I'm delighted to be speaking with Bill Hunt about what has changed with AI search. Bill has spent the last 25 years working on the websites of some of the largest multinationals. He's built two large global digital search agencies, and one of which was sold to Ogilvy. Bill has now moved into consulting, focused on repositioning search to leverage marketing for shareholder growth. Bill is currently writing a series for us at SEJ about how we can connect the dots between search visibility, user experience, and business value that will not only help CMOs but also search marketers to get buy-in from CMOs. Today, I want to have a look at that, but I also want to talk about what's changed with AI search. So first of all, Bill, let's just jump straight in there. And please, could you tell me, in your opinion, why do you think that SEO isn't working?
I think, and I love hitting this question right out of the gate because it really is a crux of a lot of problems that everyone has. I don't think SEO is necessarily broken. I think there's three key problems right now. One is paralysis. We see that, you know, we hear a lot of clients, they put search on pause, especially organic search, because they just don't know what to do. The second is, I think it's the distraction with all the hype around the AI thing. I mean, there's a different acronym every day. So which do we do? Are we chasing answers? Are we doing, LLM index files or whatever craziness sort of comes out? And then the third is just there's such a distraction from all this that a lot of the fundamentals aren't being covered. And I think that's where the problem is. And then I think it also depends on the type of business. There's some businesses haven't necessarily been negatively impacted by this. It's a lot of the, I think, information businesses that have been just destroyed because their answer is being, what people want is being answered. And if I had to break down three things that I think are really, have changed, it's, first and foremost is this whole idea around intent. Everything is about what did they search for? What are they hoping to see? And I think this caused the second, where we're hearing a lot of this omni-channel, multimodal. I mean, Google's been this way for a while, where the search results are a mix of different media formats. When I was working with Absolute Vodka, we had a drink site that was, really just an awareness driver. And every month we sat down and we looked at Google search results and says, if we were Google, what would we be changing around drinks or recipes or things like that? And so by looking at the results, we could see little by little, somebody looking for yellow cocktails. What should Google present, right? It's a list of yellow cocktails. And then they introduce the carousel. Then it's like, okay, we're in the mix of yellow cocktails, but are they appealing to people? Are we making them want to click through? Just being on the list was, okay, sure, we're ranking, but we're not getting clicks. And we started looking at our images, and we had a bottle, because they're selling vodka, right? We want the vodka bottle there. And when we started focusing on the drink, bringing it front and center, amplifying the colors, the ingredients, more and more people click. I mean, we were generating millions and millions of visits because every step that Google was making to create a different user experience, we were trying to accommodate it. And that's because we had champions behind search. They knew search was driving traffic, it was driving awareness. So I think that's the big thing, this idea of intent. And that's what Mike King has been talking about with this relevance engineering. Are we actually now constructing content that matches both what users want, that users want to reduce the friction, they just want to get an answer. And then are we getting how they're discovering this information and presenting it? And I think that's really it in a nutshell. All of this change has paralyzed us and distracted us, and we need to recenter and refocus. And that's really a key part of what this series was about is how do we refocus? How do we rethink this, both from a strategic point of view, from a shareholder value standpoint, and from a simple workflow standpoint?
Yeah, I think Historically, SEOs have been quite myopic in their approach to SEO, and I think it's very interesting now. We're having to look a lot more holistically and broader, and I do think it will benefit search journeys in the end with this. Where do you think that organizations are overlooking AI search, and what do you think they can do to remain competitive?
I think I think they don't understand it. As I mentioned, there's three dynamics that have changed at its root cause. One was, the whole, what do they mean when they do this query? And then the whole landscape of the search results has changed. How do we get in that? And third is the monetization. I don't think they're understanding that the people providing these interfaces, the Googles, Perplexities, they all got to make a buck. And they're changing their dynamic to make a dollar. And so how are we accommodating? Again, going back to Dotdash Meredith, we need to play in this environment and we need to create content that both makes money for the search engine or whatever intermediary, as well as making for us. So where they're lacking is, I don't think, again, going back to the paralysis and distraction, people are looking at, I think, the wrong things. They're not looking at the root causes of what's changed. They're not looking at the compute power has made it easier to understand intent. And I think, I know one of the things you wanted to touch on later was sort of my rant about, all the gating of content, right? That I think, we need to gate less and not to jump forward to steal the thunder from that. But I think that's another thing. People are circling the wagons. They're creating these artificial moats. They're like, well, we're not going to give it to you unless you pay. The whole thing with Cloudflare, I wrote a counterpoint to all the giddiness of the search industry. Oh, wow. We're going to have these massive revenue streams because Cloudflare is going to put up a toll booth and these bastards have to pay, to get my content. And I wrote, my counter argument was, do they need yours? Let's say you're a WebMD and you jump on, well, it's gated. You need to pay the toll. Fine. I just, if I'm any one of these AI tools or Google, let me do a deal with the Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic. I'd be glad to pay $10 million to the Mayo Clinic to get access to their content because did I always need 1,000 pages of the same stuff? And I think that's what companies are missing is that this arrogance that the search engines actually have to have their content. That's gone. They don't need yours because I guarantee there's somebody else out there that's probably going to be a little more willing to make it available and can be monetized. So I think that arrogance is probably the fourth lever of the change is companies just, look, my content is so awesome that you need to pay me a fortune to get it. Now, if it is, they'll pay. If it isn't, then, oh, well, we'll go somewhere we can get it. So I think that's sort of another problem that we have. And then again, it's relegated to the bowels of search, the whole Google thing. And I can tell you this, when I used to be on an advisory board at Google, it was a bunch of big company representatives and they were saying, we're trying to introduce this and I can't even get a meeting at your company. And I remember Julio Fernandez, who's now at Cisco, said, you will never get a meeting in my company unless you clear it with me. And they're like, you're just a lowly search guy. We want to talk to the CTO and the CIO about this cloud stuff and this AI stuff. And he's like, but because it's got Google in the name, they come to the search guy or search gal. And I think that's the other problem is a lot of this, traffic stuff is being given to the search people. Or if you're a big company, you're talking to your big holding company agency. And having been in two of them, and why I left two of them, they don't see the future. They sell what they do today. And I think there's just, nobody knows what to do and how to fix this. And so I think if companies look at really what's changed, how does content, and this is the other thing that's in the article that we have coming up on Search Engine Journal is how do we retool our organization? We need to think about what it is people really want. Going back to what I was talking about in, my 1994 business school thesis was about, this is the greatest thing we've ever had where we can take a question somebody wants and directly answer it and present our product. I think if we sort of go back to that fundamental side of this and make sure we answer the question, I think we'll solve many of our problems. It's not solve everything. The whole disintermediation of certain types of verticals, that's over. We got to find a way to be in there. We got to find a way to appear. The last thing I would say to anybody that's wondering about this, take your product and not your product, but somebody that doesn't know your product exists, and do that query in Google. It's funny, I've done this sort of four-step, we dare call it keyword research because we can't talk about keywords anymore. But I used to tell companies, if somebody doesn't know a product exists to solve a problem, how would they search for it? They would use the problem or symptoms of the problem. If they know a product exists but don't know you exist, how would they search for it? Again, maybe products, product categories, and maybe a mix of symptoms. And so I tell somebody, take the symptoms people have, go into any tool you want, Google, Perplexity, ChatGPT, Gemini, and search and see if you come up. If you don't come up, the very next question you should ask, why isn't this product or this company in your result set? That's probably the single most illuminating thing a senior executive can do. Because guess what? It's going to tell you. When you said, what is the best or most effective supply chain management for a mid-tier company or a $10 million company, it's going to tell you, well, this company that you're seeking didn't mention this. They don't appear anywhere else in where people are talking about the effectiveness. They haven't done this, this, and this. The very query that it's deconstructed to find the best or most effective, what is a mid-sized company, all those, what we call query fan out, all those secondary questions of how do I define best? How do I define this? How do I define that? You don't have the answer for it. And so when it tells you what you don't have the answer for, your very next step is, well, how do we then create the answer? And then how do we get it into these? And it comes back to making sure you're indexable. The whole JavaScript issue, making sure that you're crawlable, make sure that you're seen elsewhere on the web. This goes back to the fundamentals of PageRank. Who got cited, who was number one? And Larry and Sergey said, well, if they're cited most frequently as a source for a question, shouldn't they be? And I'm not saying go out and start doing crazy levels of link building, but does anybody else think you're an authority on this topic? Or is it by definition the Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic? They're de facto by the sheer volume of quality content. So that's the question, the thing I would tell everybody to go do that query and do the follow-up saying, why aren't we there? And you'd be surprised how efficient these tools are of telling you what you need to do to close that gap.
Just one last question that I wanted to ask you, Bill, is in a recent LinkedIn post, you stated that AI tools don't reward originality. So obviously going back to the content you were just talking about, they don't reward originality, they reward consensus. As you say, AI systems synthesize information. So if you are creating this original content, how do you teach the systems to see you?
You have to connect it to what already exists. And it's very interesting. I think, again, you use the word myopic. SEOs are myopic. SEOs are creatures of habit. They do, the irony is they do the most simplistic queries. Even asking AI, how do I do well in AI? And just really look at the results. Like when I wrote back, I asked AI one day, why this whole idea of being anywhere and everywhere, being discovered everywhere, just being whatever I forget the term was used. When I looked at all the resources Perplexity was using, it was for PR companies. They were saying to be discovered, you need to be everywhere. Well, that's what PR companies do. So it was biased to the content that had been fed in to the LLMs. And so if you're stating that you're radically different, you're not going to be shown because you're radically different. So you have to connect. And this is what I put in that article. You need to connect back to the consensus idea. If you're saying you've got a new way to cut bread, you got to talk about the old way to cut bread and connect it to a more efficient or easier way to do it. And I give an analogy when I was working, the first big project I worked on when we were acquired by Ogilvy was a common client with Cisco. They were launching telepresence, the Star Trek grade web conferencing. This was the rooms that were in the show 24. They would say, let's go to the telepresence room. People thought that was a prop. We weren't allowed to use the phrase web conferencing or web meetings because it was so beyond web meetings. We were banned from using the term like, well, how will we ever connect to people that want Star Trek grade web conferencing if we can't use web conferencing? And that's a great analogy is that we may be so radically different that we don't want to talk about the other, the old way, like traditional search. What is that? We don't even want to talk about it. It's all fancy new age stuff. But if we don't connect back to the original, we can't create, sort of an alternative way of thinking. And I think, in the article, because I spent a lot of time trying to deconstruct that question, is how do we tell people we're different by telling them we're different? And that's really what it is. We have to connect it. Where's the nuance? How do we inject this idea of we have to think differently? And I think that's what companies need to do. If you just come out cold and say, hey, we're radically different and we don't even want to talk about this other, the way everybody else does it, you're never going to be found because, again, you're not going to be there with repetition. You're not going to be there with consensus. And so, yeah, piggyback on it, take it to the next level, and then write. There are people that may, and I'm telling people, go in and write a consensus view or a non-consensus view or a non-conformist view. Say, what is an alternative to this? And that's where you'll often surface those because somebody's contrasted it to the other.
Well, Bill, it's been very interesting listening to your input on these topics. I'm going to draw things to a close now. As you know, this is a short form, but I'm very excited that, as I said at the beginning, you're writing a series for us at SEJ, which will be actually when this is gone live, your first article will just have published.
Yep.
Everybody, please come and check out Bill's author page at SEJ to catch that. And also, Bill, I believe that you have a podcast with Bill Scully over at
Mhm.
internationalwebeffectiveness.com, where people can catch up with more of your fascinating insights.
Yep.
So, yeah, Bill, thank you very much for offering me your honest opinion. And
Yeah.
thank you for being on the show.
That was great. Thank you.